everyone to another episode of This Is Dunder Moose. We are going back to the beginning. My very first episode, I had this man on the show, Mr. Rick Stump. At the time, he had just passed over the 44-year mark, and here we are about to celebrate 45 years of a continuous first edition AD&D campaign. How's it going, man?
It's going really well. Thanks for asking. How about you?
I'm doing great. I'm having a lot of fun. We were just talking a little bit before we came
Sure.
alive on the air. I am still very much learning AD&D First Edition. Ranos has called the DMG a non-Euclidean book. I think Jeffro said it was Vancian. So maybe for just to start off, do you have any advice for people that are trying to learn this edition of the game? What order do you think people should go about trying to learn how to run it as a DM?
As a DM, sure, that's actually a very good question. I'm surprised I don't get it more. The first secret to really learning how to dungeon master is to carefully read the player's handbook. All the information you need to know about what a campaign should look like is in the player's handbook, and there's a lot of little secrets and edge stuff in there. For example, at the very beginning of the player's handbook, and I'm trying to pull, I think I've got a digital copy here. It just tells you what a campaign should look like and what characters should look like and how players should act with the dungeon master. And that tells you a lot about how the dungeon master should act with players.
Yeah.
And then when you get to the dungeon master's guide, you have to understand that it is written much like both war game rules from the 40s, 50s, and 60s and textbooks of the day, because it was meant to be educational. I've said for 30 some years that the Dungeon Master's Guide is half rules and half instructions on how to do game design. It has game design built right in. But if you really want to do it, do that, and also understand that this idea that you have to know every rule before you start playing, or that cracking up the rule book at the table is some sort of error. I don't agree with that.
Right on.
If you're like, oh, let's do grappling, you know what? I've never done that before. Let's take 2 minutes, read the grappling rules, and go in. Do it. And if you make a mistake, you're in a huge hurry of, okay, well, this guy's stunned. What's the bonus here? The guy that's stunned. We're in the middle of a fight. Give him a +2. Move on. We'll look it up later and do it. Rules is written in the future, right?
Right on.
And then that talks, the old joke about the DM's best friend, the +2, -2. If you're not sure what to do, just give them a +2 or a -2 to whatever they're doing.
There you go. It's good. So there's a tension there between the almost theatrical drama of the moment and let's play the game and get the game right.
Right, and the thing is if you're playing golf, if you're learning to play golf, you start golfing with people, you're going to mess up your stance a lot when you first start. You're going to mess up your grip a lot when you first start. You're going to take your eye off the ball when you're swinging a lot when you first start. That does mean that you shouldn't play golf. The only way to get better at it is to keep doing it. Same thing here. There's the idea that, well, you don't know all the rules. You don't have them all down. You can't do it. Now, don't get me wrong. I had a huge benefit. I started playing in 77. And then as the AD&D books rolled out, I got them as they came out. So by the time the player's handbook had come out, I'd read the monster manual through completely.
Yeah.
Player's handbook came out. By the time the DMG came out, I'd read the player's handbook through completely several times. And we were trying to incorporate these rules with OD&D. And what's the difference? And there's a lot of discussion. And when the DMG came out, I already had a lot of exposure to the monster manual and the player's handbook because I'd had them for 1 or 2 years.
Yeah.
I was already familiar with OD&D and could see the differences between what was going on. So when I first sat down the first day, when I was 11, turning 12, to play AD&D First Edition with the Dungeon Master Guide, which I'd had all week, we got a lot wrong. But within a year, we were getting it right because we were willing to go in and make these risks and take these risks, and we'll go back and look this up later, etc. And it pays off very well.
I feel like there's a difference between what you did and what a lot of people did, which was, let's go back and look this up later, and then they never did, and then that just became the house rule, and they kind of
Yeah,
just
that was pretty
went with it.
common. And you see that a lot in the OSR. I've always said that I like the OSR, but I'm not OSR. But their concept of rulings, not rules, and this is something I wrote about on my blog maybe a decade ago, is what you don't understand is once you've made a ruling, you now have a rule.
Yeah.
And that is very common. And in a very real way, I should pull up I've got a blog post on it. I'll send you a link or something.
All right.
I
Yeah, you
wrote
can
it
send
one.
it to me in the private chat, and I can put it out into the YouTube comments if you like.
Yeah, it's I wrote this thing in looking back, I did a retrospective a couple years back. And I talked about the fact that there was not a clean break between OD&D and first edition, right? The books came out dribs and drabs. Every year we got a new book. There were hints in Dragon Magazine. And then Dragon Magazine kept throwing in, well, here's an alternate idea. Here's an alternate idea. Weapon specialization from the Unearthed Arcana came out in Dragon Magazine. I think, I've got a bad memory about this sometimes, I think a year before Unearthed Arcana. So there are people that are already using it long before Unearthed Arcana came out.
Yeah.
And Oriental Adventures, same way. Oh, we got proficiencies here. So what I said was in this article, and I stand by it, is at those early days between about 79 and 84, what was really going on was everyone was making their own game at the table. And a lot of us, and I do not think I'm unusual, I don't think I'm special, a lot of us did try to do rules as written as much as possible and really, really work hard. But in my experience, that doesn't survive very long because eventually, like you said, there's rulings, something works a little bit better for you, you change this, that, and the other. Even if it's just we've added some races or we've added some classes, or we've added some spells, that drift just happens. And I think that's part of the beauty of the game. I think that it's part of why it can be so wonderful and so dynamic. And I think that that's one of the things that makes D&D different from some other games, is that AD&D is very open to you making it your own, but still being interoperable. Gary himself warned about this. If you read under campaigns and time, somewhere there he points out that it can be if you have an established campaign that's been going for a couple of years, characters from one campaign probably won't be able to go to a different campaign.
Yeah.
Because the growth of the campaign has changed so much, the players aren't compatible anymore. And he argues that if you've got a couple campaigns where the players just fit back and forth, that's either coordinated or lucky or something else like that's going on.
Yeah.
And I believe that. I believe that quite a bit.
So I guess that then begs the question, like, is it more fair to your players anticipating that they may jump from table to table to try and cleave as closely to rules as written as possible so that you're not putting them at a disadvantage? Or is that just kind of is that a fool's errand because the other table is also not going to be cleaving to rules as written? Like, is it a Sisyphean task to try and prepare them to go anywhere?
It seems like it's really difficult. Now, at the same time, I say it seems like it's really difficult, but I think that that's not the case. And I'll give you a big example. Between 1985 and 1992, 7 years, I was stationed at Fort Bragg. And at that time, Lou Pulsifer was living there. And Lou's Tanilda campaign is actually 2 years older than mine, although he did end it about a decade ago. And Lou is, if you're not familiar with him, is a top-notch award-winning game designer.
His name is all throughout, like, Dragon Magazine and stuff.
Oh yeah, yeah. He was at one point he was a senior editor for White Dwarf and Dragon Magazine at the same time.
Wow. Okay.
And he established what was it, Supernova, the first science fiction game fanzine ever. And I can't remember, one of the guys doing the history of D&D contacted him because the first professional that Gary sent a letter to about there's this new game we call Dungeons and Dragons was Lou.
Wow.
Because he was just so big in the industry. Well, he ran a campaign, and he'd been running it, and he'd transitioned from OD&D to AD&D just 2-3 years before I got there. And we had soldiers coming in, and you'd have guys arrive at Fort Bragg, see his little flyer in the back of a bookstore, come over from all over the planet. Guys, oh, I learned to play in Germany. Oh, I've been playing since '79 at home, bringing in their characters. And it usually, at the most, it would take he and I, because our 2 campaigns were co-equal, Seaward and Tanilda. It would take us maybe 2 minutes to fix everything. The normal thing that we had to do was, I got this custom magic item. I'm like, sure, or let's change this. And that was usually the most radical thing, was a custom magic item. But these guys who'd never, seen this before, coming from campaigns from thousands of miles away, it was like, okay, let's sit down, and they'd just play. And they would very quickly learn the 1 or 2 things that we did different. So it sounds like it should be insurmountable, but seeing maybe 80 guys come in and out of this shared campaign, and other people DM. At one point, we had 4 different campaigns going back and forth.
Yeah.
In practice, it wasn't difficult at all.
So that's been one of my experiences as I've been trying to play this game, is that, like, for whatever reason, when you try to say, like, this is how I want to play, this is the style I want to use, like online, especially Twitter, like, you'll just get a lot of pushback. Yeah. And a lot of the debate happens. Like, I think the people that are very vociferous about this can never happen, or that's not how it works, they're not actually playing it. They're just imagining in their head how they think it would go. And there's so many things like what I just did, saying, oh, well, if you're not all locked down on the same rules, it must be hard to go table to table. But the dudes that are doing it are like, that's not a thing, man. It's nobody even thinks that way when we're playing. It's a thought experiment only.
Well, here's a huge example. When Arms Law first came out, it started off, Rollmaster started off as Arms Law. Okay. And it was a published set of alternate combat rules for D&D, where you take out D&D's combat, you plug in Arms Law. I had a good friend of mine that was running a game, and we had mutual players between our 2 sessions. And he, like, I'm doing it, and he plugged it in. They loved it. Well, you get a character from that campaign that's using they have their weapons are +5, +10, +15, et cetera, up to +25.
Wow.
Right.
Okay.
Their armor types are 1 through 20, and then you have a defensive bonus of between -10 and 150. Radically different numbers. Some of those guys like, hey, can I play this character in Seaward? And it usually, because I understood the rules for our Arms Law, and sometimes because they understood the rules for Arms Law, like, oh yeah, you know what to do. Okay, my +15 sword's now +3 sword. My armor type, 20 is now armor class 2, etc. And consider using a completely foreign combat system, and it was usually 3-4 minutes max, and they could sit down and play in your game, or vice versa. I feel like the class of player back then must have been more educated, or just maybe because there were less systems to learn. Well, listen, I don't think so. I knew guys playing D&D and other games back then where I don't know if I trust them with a driver's license. I'm not saying they're bad people. I'm not saying they're bad players. But these are the sorts of people where, they're in their 20s and their parents are still balancing their checkbook for them every month.
Got it. So I just popped in the chat for the YouTube. This is your product, Far Realms. This kind of collects some of those rules and odds and ends that you have come across or come up with in Seaward. Yeah,
that's a very stripped down version of my house rules.
Okay,
very stripped down. It's only, I say that like it's only 106 pages or something like that. But that includes a lot of classes, races, a ton of spells, that sort of stuff. And then some very mild alterations to like how clerics, what level clerics can go to, and can demi-humans be clerics, things like that. The books, it seems popular. It sells well. I've had a lot of people reach out to me to thank me for the book, which is always very, very flattering.
It's high. It's got a lot of stars too, as far as reviews. It's rated high on Drive.
Like I said, it's very surprising because one thing that confuses people about me, I think, and I get this from the feedback, is D&D is my hobby. I'm not interested in turning it into a career, or I mean, I make a little bit of money off my books every month, and I'm talking about a very little bit, and that's nice. It's beer money, but I'm not here to change the world. Not here to change the gaming landscape. I just like playing and I like sharing,
Yeah.
and it's very flattering that I took the stripped down house rules, Far Realms, put them out, and people like it. It's I didn't really expect it to do much or to be very well liked, and the fact that it is well liked and it is popular is very pleasant. It's a very pleasant surprise for a guy who I will actually put off gaming sometimes to do barbecue, one of my other hobbies.
Right on.
But yeah, Far Realms is in there. I think that the biggest thing in Far Realms is something I just did. I started my Substack. I've had a blog for a long time. I'm migrating over to Substack. And in it, I describe one of the only things about AD&D First Edition I personally really dislike and that I've changed. And that's I go, you go initiative by side, where if it's your initiative, you do everything all at once. And if it's not your initiative, you wait until they do everything all at once, then you do everything all at once. And like I said, my Substack has a big description of it about why I dislike it and why I think that it's a problem. And frankly, the Dungeon Master's Guide, when it discusses it, says this is not the best. This is not accurate. But it can be so difficult to do it initiative by person that this is an easier way of doing it. So in Far Realms, I have the basics of how I change, and I have a slightly different initiative system of how I do individual initiative. Yeah.
Okay.
And that's really I would say that's the biggest change between and excuse me. Oh, you still hear me? I just had mine here.
Yeah, it was like you went like robot voice for a single syllable, but I think we're good now.
Okay, good. Is that I do combat by segments and rounds, and that I do individual initiative. And I'm not alone. It's not like it's a unique invention of mine. I know at least 8 other people that do something so close to mine it blends in. And I've never had a player complain that it's difficult. They usually say, "Oh, that's faster and easier," and combat went so fast and smooth.
Fast combat is definitely a plus. Like that was when I started looking into 1E. That was my frustration with my 5th edition play. And again, I wasn't an expert at that. I'm not trying to take anything away from that system from people who enjoy it, but for me, the combat took so long that like we would only get through like 3 or 4 rooms of the dungeon in a night, and then a bunch of dads, we don't play often. So I was like, I need something snappier and punchier.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm having an allergy attack here. The window's open. I got pollen. For me, with players that have been with me at least a session or two, 10 rounds of combat usually takes about 12-15 minutes max.
Okay.
Which is pretty good.
That's really good. Yeah.
And with my main group of players, the 5 people that have been playing with me on average 15 years, 16 years, a round of combat takes about 40 seconds.
Right on, man. So what has changed in Seaward since the last time we talked?
The last time we talked. Okay. The last time we talked.
That was 8 months ago.
We have had 4 player characters start their domains, which was a pretty big deal. We had, and one of those domains is on one of the moons, by the way. And it gets better. That's the 3rd domain to be on one of the moons. There was a big war, an Orcish war that destroyed one of the Orcish city-states to the west of the Stone Hills. And in the eastern caverns off Skull Mountain, the toughest current players made it past what was called the Middens and into the Tomb of the Space Elves and found a cache of disruptor rifles from the Space Elves.
Space Elf disruptor rifles.
Well, they also learned about the Great Space Elf War between the Red Elf Empire and the Green Elf Empire, and it explained a lot more about what's going on with the 2 closest elf kingdoms to Seaward itself. So pretty eventful. And the funny thing is some of the toughest, highest level characters are breaking down the disruptor rifles for the components because they're trying to turn that into part of a powerful magical sword.
That's amazing. I don't know if I would have thought of that. I'm like, this gun is better than every weapon we have, and they're like, no, this could be better.
Well, there's a purpose behind this. You have to understand that these guys are aware of some things that there's things I'm trying to keep under wraps because it's not general knowledge. But
Oh, okay.
if you've been playing the campaign, you understand that there's a secret war going on between groups that nobody knows about in the background, and it's all over an artifact that has incredible destructive power.
Darnell says, leave it to D&D players to turn rifles into a cool sword.
right. And it's the whole, hey, we got
hilarious.
This cool, hey, that's the ingredients we need for this giant two-handed sword we're making. And like you said, only in D&D, I'll get rid of the disintegrators and the disruptors. Let's make us a sword.
We want to do our fighting up close.
Right. Can't use a blast rifle in a fist fight. What's going on here?
There's
no, but it's been a ton of fun. And what else is going on? The Orc War was a fun one. Dynamics been going on for, I'd want to say, 30 years. Is the danger of the Orcish city states to the west of the Stone Hills. And I've got two groups playing right now. My Discord group, which is all online. Matter of fact, we got a game with them tonight.
Cool.
And my in-person group. They interact a fair bit. They affect each other's lives a fair bit. But the Discord group was moving out to a place called Wyvern Keep when suddenly I rolled 3 encounters on the same day. In one of the charts, I rolled Orc for all 3 encounters.
Oh, Darnell knows all about that in the chat.
Oh, yeah. So I said, well, that makes sense. The closest Orcish city state is trying to attack because they're very concerned that this domain is going to be established and they're going to be on their back foot again.
All right, pause for just a second.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the paradigmatic shifts I had to make when playing in this style. When I was used to pre-published modules or the concept that the DM has to create the story and then kind of...
Isn't that weird?
Allow the players to experience it. And it is, I feel like, and I'm not trying to judge anybody. I'm not trying to speak from on high, but for me personally, it is so much more fun and rewarding as a DM to be surprised with everyone else and then to be like put on the spot where you're like, okay, now I got to make this make sense. And then because your world is developed, answers just, either
they just arrive.
Yeah.
Well, I got this fancy name that I use for the core ideas I use for game mastering. I call it Psychotronic gaming.
Yes.
And the key element there is that players drive action, right? I've got a handful of NPCs I've made. As a matter of fact, remind me about the boss.
Okay, the boss.
And I use note cards and notebooks and actually project management software.
Project management software.
Yeah. I use Zoho Project to track. So I track what the NPCs, good and bad, are doing in the background, and that's tracked with the calendar for the game. There's a game clock.
Yes.
And this just happens, and the players, if they're in the right place at the right time, like, oh, by the way, there's a big fire at such and such today, because that's part of one of these things. But the players decide what to do. I know that when players join me, a lot of times they're very confused of, okay, what are we doing today? I'm like, I don't know. Where do you want to go? What's the story? What do you mean the story? I mean, here's the rumors you got. Which one is a plot point? I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. Go do it,
Isn't there some gnarled wizard sitting in the Aragorn booth going to tell me what I need to do this session?
Right, this was it startles a lot of people, especially when they come from 5th edition, or if they come from really shocks them. They come from World of Darkness stuff like Vampire the Masquerade. But after session 2, they're calling me up on Tuesday. Hey, I know that when we're in town, can we do X, Y, and Z? Or they'll email me now. When I used to play in Fort Bragg back in the 80s and 90s, we had to start our sessions. We said we started to play at 5. I'd arrive at 3 because people would show up early and like, okay, in the month since we were our last adventure, I want to do X, Y, and Z, and we had to do all the off-table stuff because back then, you didn't have email and text. And about 3 times a year, we have a big meeting. All the DMs get in there, and everyone would show up, and we bring food. And it was just, what are you doing on your downtime? What are you doing when you're away from the sessions? And they just drove everything, and we were just sort of making sure that we were tracking what was going on in the background, and the results. And another thing that is, there is no status quo.
Yeah.
For example, right now the players are having a real problem. I call it Super Dungeon. The Mega Dungeon is in this really rugged area called the Briars. There's no food. There's almost no water. There's very few places to go. It's full.
How did you even get them there in the first place?
There is a road protected by magic where if you're bold and brave and you rush, you can get up and down if you get enough supplies.
Okay. Cool.
And the place had been packed with 3 goblin tribes and trolls, giant spiders, and giant ants were the big ones. A couple years ago, a bunch of players said, well, we're going to do this thing. If you've got a map, you can't get lost. True. We're going to map the entire Briars.
Nice.
And it was like 16 months real-time gaming. I think it was 2-3 years in game. And they mapped the entire area. Map it. Massive thing. I've got several articles on my blog about how it almost crashed the local economy. It angered the peasants because the price of food went up so high, et cetera, et cetera. When they were done, they effectively wiped out the kobolds and the goblins and the trolls. They leave. Now what's the problem? There's nothing to eat the ants and the spiders, so the entire place is getting overrun with giant ants and giant spiders. So now, like, we need another expedition to go in there with cloud kill and kill all these damn ants because they're everywhere now. We made the place 5 times more dangerous.
You took out the predators.
Yeah, we took out the apex predators. So now the ants and the giant spiders are attacking nearby villages because they're intelligent and they're trying to make their own little kingdom. They cause themselves so much problems by killing off the humanoids. And that sort of stuff, I would have never thought of that, But with them going through and doing all this, I'm like, well, they're all the layers are wiped out. What's going to happen next? There's nothing to eat the spider eggs or the ant eggs. They're just going to take over the place.
Yeah. It's better the devil you know than the one you don't, right?
It is absolutely true. And they're just crying about it. And I don't blame them. Because it's tough. And the Discord group is in general lower level. And they're like, oh, well, let's go through the Briars and get rich the old-fashioned way. We'll go up to the dungeon and no, we can't go through the Briars or just get eaten by ants. So we have to go someplace else and do other things. So
the Briars got way worse than they ever were.
Yeah, the players made the Briars 10 times deadlier than they used to be. And you can't...
Now you just need a good chef that can start a craze for spider eggs in town.
Well, one thing I will tell you that I find hilarious is just how goofy it ended up being about how the players change things so dramatically if you let them.
Yes.
And if you let them, they can really make things a lot better.
But that takes confidence, right? Like if you're from this other school of gaming where the DM is in charge of the fun and is the curator of the story, like as a DM, you've got to learn how to like just let go, raise your hands on the roller coaster and go over the hill with them, right?
Absolutely. You gotta trust yourself, and that can be very difficult. And more importantly, you're gonna make mistakes. Mm-hmm. If you make a mistake, it's okay to say you made a mistake.
Because what you're describing is an unruinable game. No matter what they do.
Yeah, there's nothing you can do to ruin the game. My oldest son, Jack, is 27 now, and he's been running his own AD&D winning game for about 12 years.
Nice.
And ages ago, he said something that summarizes it up. He says, "You can't derail my campaign because I don't have any rails." There's no rails. There's nothing for you to derail. You can't break it. There's nothing to break. It's literally what do you want to do? You know, and well, here, let me over on the Discord, I'm going to drop something for you.
Okay.
I just dropped that one link, but let me upload a file, and you can share it. I'm leery of sharing. I'm afraid I'm going to lose connection here if I do that.
Yeah.
But you're more than willing to keep it no matter what. But my players, when I started the campaign, I had a river going to a coastline, and there was a town, Seaward, where the king lived, and across the river was the good wizard's tower, so you could teach spells to wizards. And then down the coast was the pirates. Right? That's it.
All right.
And here, let me open this image. This is the image I want you to share, if you don't mind.
Sure.
And from that, the players went out. Now, the image I want to show you is the current core campaign area. When you get that up there, each hex is 10 miles. Right? So people ask me, well, why did you do 10 miles? Why not 6? I was 11.
Yeah.
And 10 miles is easily divisible on the fly when you're 11. So the main area here.
Hang on just a second. I'm almost there.
The main area here is fairly large. Now, if you look at the right and lower down, you'll see a little dot with a star. That's Seaward. That's that city that I created.
Right here.
Back in 1979. Right. And I eventually I've got the mountains and the rivers, I put in the forests. But you see everything circled in red?
Yeah.
That's the headquarters of a domain that a PC made.
Did you have to provide any guidance or let them know that this was possible, or did it just grow naturally out of?
It just grew naturally. Like one of the first one was Adrian. A friend of mine got his wizard up to domain level. He knew that there was a mine up in those mountains. And he's like, oh, I'm going to put my tower up there. And then he asked the king, oh, I want to, be an independent, free city in the kingdom. Sure.
Here's a better view.
Right. And then Timberlake was the same thing. High-level fighter. Hey, I want a domain up there. And the really funny thing is he finished his domain, and then he left. He went off to college, and another player had been playing his character was his other character's brother in game.
Okay.
And his ranger, so the ranger domained, and he took over. So Timberlake has got a lot of rangers. Wyvern Keep, that's that little tower symbol, almost at the center of the map.
Right here.
That's a fun one. One guy fought a big war there, says I'm in a domain there. This is what player number 1 with character number 1. He starts to build a domain, character gets murdered, character dies, doesn't get resurrected. So player 2 brings in his character. No, I'm going to build the big fortress on top of it. And he builds the village around it. He gets ready to do everything. He leaves. Doesn't play anymore. Doesn't want to do anything. Moves on. Player 1 comes back with character 2 from him. Okay, I'm going to build the fortress on top and domain there. I leave for the army. In the army, player 3 brings another character. I'm going to take over this domain, takes over the domain, and then through things I don't want to go into great detail, his character runs away in terror, abandoning the fortress, and becomes a bandit because he was exalted cowardice. So this has been built by multiple player characters for multiple players, and now it's still in the controls of NPCs because nobody ever domains there permanently. They just move or die or quit.
It's like a haunted house.
Almost, and that was the center of that Orcish war because at the time it was the border. But you'll see a character just put a big domain just west of it. So with the exception of the elven towns and the dwarven towns that existed before, all the domains in here, some of which are allied with the king or not, this was all made by player characters.
So they started, I think you started with like 3 hexes down here by Seaward, right?
I started with 2 hexes by Seaward, yeah.
2 hexes. And as this populated out, how much of this did you create? Did you ever use Appendix be for populating the landforms, or did you want something that was a little less random and made a little more geological sense?
I actually sketched in the outlines. I want mountains like this, this, and this. I want forests like this, and this.
Mm-hmm.
And then some of the details I did use random rolling too. That's why the Stone Hills exist there. I was rolling rugged and rough, and I'm like, oh, well, it's just a rough area between two mountain chains.
Yeah.
Fine. So we'll do that. And then off map to the north, there's a big lake that I rolled randomly when I was moving north.
Okay.
But the coastline, the main mountains, and the main rivers were all put on purpose. And right now, the Discord group is up by River Hearth, by that lake that's in the middle. And they're very nervous because I've done the math, and I think about as many player characters have died at that lake as have died in the Mega Dungeon. And most of them were killed by the giant beavers.
Oh, yeah. Those are no joke.
In the Grand Lodge of the Beaver King and his giant beavers is the loot of about 5 TPKs and another 10 dead PCs.
How do you feel? Okay, how do you feel as a DM about a player character death or a TPK?
I'll tell you the funny answer. It's not my fault.
Right.
It happens. Sometimes people bite off more than you can chew. Sometimes the dice are against you. You roll a random encounter, and it's tough.
Because sometimes when the players get themselves killed because they don't recognize the signs of a unbalanced encounter when they come across it, and they're like,
right.
"No, I'm going to."
Sometimes it can be bad. I think the current main group, my current in-person players say the closest it got was during the mapping of the Briars. I rolled a random encounter, and it was a maximum number of trolls. And they're like, that was really bad. We use up like 3 magic items completely. We had people ready to just run off in the woods and take the risk of getting lost in the Briars, which is a death sentence.
All right, so this is kind of a thorny issue on Twitter just this week, but have you ever, when you saw Max Trolls, were you tempted to fudge that?
No, not really. I mean,
never.
No. I think that when I was in my mid-teens, 14, 15, 16, I fudge rolls. Oh, this encounter is too weak. This encounter is too soft. Yeah. There should be more. There should be less. He should have hit. It would be really cool if he'd hit that guy. And everyone started having less fun. And it was more work for me.
More work for you, and everyone has less fun.
Everyone had less fun. So I just let the dice fall.
Because I feel like the big debate about that is touching on our earlier topic, where it's like, if you think that the job of the DM is to run the story, and especially if you have a spotlight on the mono party, right? Like if your campaign is 5 people, like the bridge crew of the Starship Enterprise, and they just go everywhere and do everything, and if one of them dies or if all of them die, then the story is over. Then it starts to make sense to me why people will be like, well, you need to fudge the dice every now and then.
Well, yeah, because suddenly you're not playing D&D, you're writing Doctor Who.
That's right.
Well, the thing that I'm going to tell you 2 things. The thing that really hooked me on D&D, I was 9. Okay, 8 going on 9. I think. Let me do the math. Yeah, I was 8 going on 9, and the only reason I got to play, I've told you this, was my babysitter was dating the dungeon master.
Yep. And he didn't want you to play, but she was cool.
She's cool. And they were like, oh, well, you go out front. And I hit a pit trap and I die. And my character just died. Like, it was like 2 minutes.
Were they all smirking at each other when that happened?
And they're like, and I'm like, now what? And the guy said, we can make another character. And that's what hooked me. I can make another character again?
Yeah.
Okay. When people join my game in general, it's not like you can't play if you don't do this, but in general, I make you make 2 characters.
Okay.
You have to have 2, and then start playing with one of them, and then at a certain point, I'm going to make you play with the other one, so you get multiple active player characters. And once people do that a couple of times, with almost without fail, they're like, "Oh, I'm going to make a couple more characters."
It's like an aha moment,
right? There's this. Oh, this isn't about this group of people. It's about me using characters to explore this universe, right? And when that happens, they can become much more dynamic. They do a lot more initiative. They're still afraid of dying, but they're not afraid of dying, you know?
Yeah.
And they take a lot more. They enjoy it more. They flat out enjoy it more.
Well, they know the fun's not over just because one of their characters dies.
Right. And then, I think my longest player currently, she has been playing in Seaward next spring it's going to be 34 years.
Wow.
She's been playing long enough that the first character she rolled up for the campaign died of old age.
And there are mechanics for that in the DMG.
There's mechanics for it.
Elves probably won't do that.
Never has less than 5 active characters. Never has less than 5 active characters. If somebody dies and can't come back, or she retires somebody because they're old or they're crippled up, boom, new one. Start playing them.
Yeah. Level 1 characters are free.
Oh, yeah. And don't get me wrong, you got some other stuff going on too, such as you got to make sure that, and this is one of the few things I kind of sometimes do goofy. Oh, player character so-and-so died here. We couldn't get the body back and all this loot is there. I might move that loot. A monster found it, or just make it a bit more of a challenge to get it back sometimes, not always.
Like the owlbear ate the corpse and then pooped the loot out in a different hex.
Right. Exactly right. Something like that. That's the closest I come to sort of cheating a little bit or fudging the dice of, well, you don't know exactly where he fell, so you can't go back and get that +4 sword right away. That might happen. Not always. Oh, that reminds me, I mentioned earlier the boss. Another thing that's really fun is if you let the player characters drive action and you just track your NPCs in the background, things will happen that you're never going to think up on your own. My personal favorite is this one. For about 40 years, there have been these, every now and then they'd find, here's some bandits or here's some assassins, or there'd be notes from, oh, blah, 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 do this. The boss says to do this. If you don't do this, the boss is going to be really mad. Here and there. Right? No big deal. You got to report to the boss, make sure the boss gets his cut. About a year and a half ago, they finally found out that the boss is a guy. There was one NPC who called himself the boss. He's been behind this stuff for all these ages. Well, they kept seeing these hints. One guy said the first hint was before my parents met.
Wow.
We're going through this stuff and talking about it, and they defeated him. It was a very tough fight. And they realized, oh my gosh, all this time, we just thought they meant, a boss, not the boss is a guy. I don't know that if I had come up with this idea that there's a bad guy called the boss, that I could have kept it under wraps for 4 months, let alone 40 years. But the players and the decisions they made and everything else, like, oh, okay, whatever, keep moving on.
That's not the only kind of funny character thing that's happened. Like, wasn't there, last time you came on, you talked about how, like, your players, and they sound like amazing players, by the way, they got sick of humping stuff back and forth to the dungeon, and they were like, well, once we've cleared the first level, we're just going to put a home base in the dungeon so we can rest here.
Oh, yeah.
And there was like an office room or something that said, don't trust, I can't remember the dude's name.
Don't trust Rupert.
Don't trust Rupert. And, like, Rupert's a dude in the game, yeah?
Yeah, he's an NPC in the game. He used to be, at once upon a time, he was a player character. But now he is the thing that the experienced players fear the most in the campaign.
Because they never learned why it was written not to trust him.
They learned why. They learned why.
Oh, they did? Okay.
Okay, I'll tell you guys the secret lore of Rupert.
Dude, this is a moment. I feel like this is like the egg of Coot being about to be explained. So yeah, lay down this. Tell us about Rupert, man.
So way back in the mid-'80s, early 80s, they found the contraption. Now, deep under Skull Mountain is something called the contraption.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying it's the machine to lumb the mad, but I'm not saying it's not based on the machine of Lum the Man. So it's this really powerful machine, and it's got 20 dials and 20 levers and 20, all this stuff. And if you set it to certain settings and then push the big red button, something happens.
Nice.
That something happen could be all the moons reverse their orbit. It could be you get an artifact level wish. It can be all of your stats go to 25. There's a bunch. I've got this huge chart.
Wow.
But it can also be every living creature on the planet falls asleep for 24 hours and can't be awakened. Or,
Oh, man.
But every time you mess with it and push the button, there's a chance that you get hit with a curse that can't be avoided. Right? So, way back when, we had players that had found the contraption and had a ring of wishes. And Rupert, the guy around Rupert wishes that he can have multiple Geas and quest spells cast on him at the same time. I'm like, okay, where's this going? Then he said, I wish that I am unable to die until I complete all of my Geas and quests.
Wow.
Okay, where are we going with it? And he said, I wish that I can go into the contraption. I knew how to get to the contraption and can get there safely. And his wishes are gone. So then he has the cleric in the group cast a quest on him. The quest is to go down and learn what settings in the contraption destroy the contraption. Because, of course, there's a setting to destroy the contraption. So he goes in there, fiddles around, hits the button, and one of the curses from the contraption is it puts you under a Geas request. So his Geas he got was to protect the contraption against all harm. This goes on, and now he's got something. I've got a chart. I've got a chart. He's got multiple conflicting Geases and quests.
He's never going to die.
So you've got this guy who's got all the powers of a maximum hit point vampire, none of the weaknesses, who's literally been driven insane by conflicting Geases and quests. I must make sure the contraption is only used for good. I must make sure it's only used for evil. On and on and on. So he's actually in a position where
he's a basket.
If you run into him and you say the wrong things, you can trigger a Geas quest. And if you do something wrong, now I've been quested. I must kill you. So he wanders around the mountain. Everyone's afraid of him. Nobody messes with him. And he's this shambling, unkillable madman floating around. I could have never thought of that.
That's crazy. You guys heard it here first on This Is Dunder Moose.
That's right.
The backstory of Rupert was wilder than you could have imagined.
And that's why you can never trust Rupert.
Don't know if what he's saying. Rupert.
Right. Rupert can't. Is what he's saying the truth, or is he being compelled by a curse? You don't know.
Yeah.
You'll never know. But I'll tell you right now, the most fear you're going to see in a character in the campaign is they're in the mountain, and they see this well-dressed man with a scimitar made of sharpened granite, with a jaunty smile and a feather in his cap. Everyone's just like, run, it's Rupert, run.
Oh, man.
So, yes, that is the deep lore on why you never trust Rupert.
That is not the kind of thing that a teenage DM can sit down and make up and put in their world. And
I don't think Lovecraft could have thought that up as weird and wacky as it is. I mean, that's multiple player characters making horrible decisions.
That is the true cat's paw of the wish being
sure.
horribly
Wish whatever
abused.
you want. Let's go. Again, my oldest son, who's been playing the campaign for a long time, Jack, has spent years. Why the heck did a player character do that? That is ridiculous. Because there's so many things, especially the mountain, that are just like, he's like, why is this here? Like, oh, the player so and so, this character did this. Why? This is completely ridiculous. And this goes on and on and on for years. Well, about 4 months ago, he goes, I got this idea. Now, his main character domained in the mountain.
Mm-hmm.
He actually built a new hidden level in the secret. Right, so he lives there. We got 2 guys doing that. I'll tell you another joke in a second. But he came to me and goes, I got this idea. I'm like, what is it? Well, I'm going to go into the mountain. I'm going to make this thing. I'm going to call it the machine, and my goal is to do X, Y, and Z. I'm like, sure, this sounds good. And I'm like, I'm going to do some research, and finally gets with the other players. And this is about a week and a half ago, and he's talking about it. He's been doing research in game quietly with me in the background for like since last Christmas. He sits there and goes, I got this idea. I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, X, Y, and Z. And one of the other players looks up and goes, it's another great idea. But this time, your grandchildren be wondering, why is this here? Who is stupid enough to do this?
And you, as the DM, get to say the same thing when they get TPK'd.
Yeah, exactly.
Not my
your
fault.
Dad, your uncle did this. You thought it was a good idea. Yeah. And that just keeps going on. And my wife noticed something because I kept, okay, they believe that there's a curse on Skull Mountain that makes you do silly things or goofy things. Right? And she realized, you keep encouraging him. I'm like, yes, that's the curse of the mountain. If you're doing something foolish, as a DM, I just like, yeah, that's a good idea. Why don't you do that? You know,
the curse of the mountain is you should totally do that.
That sounds, hold my beer. That sounds great. Yeah. Or more better, I'll hold your beer. Go do that. That sounds good.
That's awesome.
And that's another thing a Dungeon Master could do. One of the characters, I had a random encounter with one of the parties. They're all second level. And one of them, the treasure he took was this cool bracelet. And the character's name is Talner. And Talner is a cleric with a low intelligence, but he does really good. And they noticed when Talner was along, things were good. And they played for 4 more real years before they found out that the bracelet is an Agathian. Monster from the Fiend Folio. And they're like, wow, and whenever we're facing these big evil things, Talner was always there. How'd that happen? And they slowly realized I was stepping in, and rather than saying the Agathian will, influence people, because the Agathian will influence people to go along to fight evil. As a dungeon master would say, well, it would be a good idea to have Talner on this one, don't you think? And it was just, and that's to reflect this sort of in-game effect of a curse or a psionic effect. You don't have to say, well, I rolled the dice and you have to do X, like, oh, we're being influenced. You can simply sit there and quietly, I think it'd be a good idea if you're about Talner. Yeah. And that's how you do the effects of that curse.
The subtle hand.
Or that the good creature is trying to keep you lucky or whatever. It's subtle. You don't roll dice and say, you've got cursed. And
if the DM makes a stupid ruling or something like that, you can be mad at him. But if it's just like something stupid another player did, everyone's like, well, yeah, player's gonna play her.
Right. So, sometimes a subtle hint from the dungeon master reflects a curse or a good creature using its empathy powers or something. Don't forget that. It's really powerful. I love
that.
Tool.
That's really good.
What else we did recently that was a ton of fun? We did that. Something I was going to mention. So for those people that have been to Skull Mountain in my game, there's a main entrance, but on the other side of this mountain is something called the Deep, and it's a shaft that goes straight down into the mountain to a deep lake, and it's 1,800 feet deep, right?
Wow.
And there's a couple bridges across it here and there, and this, that, and the other. And it's rather infamous because you don't go down the deep. If you come in from the top, people don't come back. But you're down in the mountain, you can use the bridges and stuff to cross. I'm not going to give too much away, but the player, Nick, actually wiped out an entire layer of ogre magi living in the deep.
Whoa.
He had a lot of help. And took it over, and now he's domaining there. And
nice.
And this is how he puts it. I don't want to give away the secrets. He said, when you get to the top of Skull Mountain, you're like, oh, skeletons, kobolds. Okay, it's a dungeon. You down 2-3 levels, like, oh, there's an evil temple down here, and there's a place you can summon evil elementals. Wow, this is pretty profound. You down to level 20 where I am, and there's an HOA meeting. Now, there's donuts and coffee in the back.
Terrifying.
You're going to die, but there's donuts and coffee in the back.
Yeah, and they're going to be polite to you the whole time you're dying.
Right. He goes, yeah, and he goes, I live in there, but I'm very, very, very careful to not upset the HOA because their fines are horrific.
Yeah. The Ogre Magi HOA. So there are a couple questions in the chat.
Sure, let's take a look.
In our last 5 minutes here. So R-Dubs says, Rick, you were talking about 2 hexes. Is this due to domain size recommendations for initial PC holdings, or a happy coincidence while designing?
That's exactly where it came from. The idea that I had at first was that Seaward was founded by a guy who was domaining, and he was still building his domain.
Okay.
That's exactly where it came from. And that's why I did it in 10-mile hexes, So you do a radius of 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 easier. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Good catch, R-Dubs. Tag 1080 asks, do you ever play as a player?
Oh, yeah, whenever I can. A matter of fact, I play in a Champions game that one of my kids runs. I play in a second edition game that my wife runs. And right now, one of my sons, we're doing an experiment because when we talk about it, we want to know what we're talking about. We're doing a quick 15-session 5e. So I'm playing a cleric in a 5e game right now.
Okay.
Yeah, whenever I can.
I think it's cool that your family is involved.
Yeah. Well, here's one. What are the alignments in which your players and how often are groups working at cross purposes? We have almost exclusively good guys. There are two exceptions. There's a chaotic neutral assassin, which I allow neutral assassins. And there's a lawful neutral thief, who is more of a bounty hunter type. But in general, it's very good. But they work across purposes a surprising amount, simply because, as an example, Seeker, who is a very powerful character run by player A, is very opposed to the Elven kingdom of Tregallan, which you can see on the map. He wants them pushed out. He doesn't trust them. He looks like a conspiracy theorist with a corkboard covered in pictures and yarn connecting newspaper articles. He's convinced that it's a horrible thing. At the same time, you've got another character, I want to say Ingrid, played by player B, who is all about, well, we need to bolster Tregallan so that they can keep the, humanoids and stuff to the north in the Great Forest from killing us, and they often are in conflict. Yeah. That's just one example. Yeah.
Cool. Any other last minute questions in the chat? Otherwise, we can transition to the closer. I know it's weird to have a Dunder Moose show that only goes an hour, but it is during the middle of the day and I'm on lunch at work. So,
Dunder Moose, it was great. I would love to do this again. Thank you for having me on.
Dude, you have an open invitation. Anytime you want to come on the show, you are welcome. I really appreciate, because it has been a little heated on Twitter lately. Anybody watching this that's like, that's weird, that's not how I play. I want to just please be open to this, because clearly, if a man can play this game when he's 12 and then 45 years later, we're still just cracking up at the crazy, funny, amazing things that happen. There is something to this, and you don't have to. He's playing 5th edition as well. You don't have to give up the way you're playing now, but please be open. And thank you so much, Rick, for sharing how it can go.
Absolutely, and Dunder Moose, I want to have you on my podcast soon. So I'll send you a note. We'll get you over. We can talk there. I want to hear more about what you're doing.
All right, man. Yeah, sounds good. You got it.
All right. Take care of everybody.
All right. See you guys. Be safe, play games, and have fun.